I warned them. I told the HOA board again and again that the backup fire pump behind my property could save lives. But they didn't listen. They fined me, they mocked me, then they sabotaged it. And when the factory started burning, when the hydrants went dry, and when the flames came for their families, Karen screamed, because that was the day she realized the system she tried to destroy was the only thing keeping her husband alive. It sat at the far edge of my lot, tucked behind a row of hardy oaks that had grown strong along the boundary line. A concrete slab, 2 rust-resistant steel cabinets, a capped hydrant outlet, and a modest pressure gauge box. The fire backup system wasn't pretty, I'll admit that. It wasn't meant to be. It was built to save lives. I designed it myself 6 years ago, shortly after retiring from the fire service. 30 years in the department teaches you one thing. When the big one hits, whether it's fire flood or the unpredictable chaos of both seconds matter. And water pressure fails faster than faith. Our cul-de-sac bordered a light industrial strip on one side and dry brush fields on the other. When I bought this property, I saw the risk no one else wanted to admit. That's why I installed the pump. The system was simple. A dedicated diesel generator, dual pumps, tied into a redundant line that looped from my well-fed reservoir into the local hydrant matrix. If city pressure failed or dropped below threshold during an emergency, my pump would kick in. Not just for me, for everyone on the grid, including the small factory down the slope, including Karen's husband's warehouse, including the entire street. But the HOA never asked, never understood. They only saw the gray box, the industrial equipment that clashed with their vision of an ideal community. That vision, manicured lawns, plastic flamingos, pastel shutters, and smug uniformity, was enforced by a board of 5. But really, it was one woman who held the leash. Karen Whitmore, platinum blonde, bob-perfect white teeth, always carrying a clipboard and a bottle of designer cucumber water. She had opinions on everything, especially my corner of the neighborhood. The first letter arrived 3 months after I completed the install. You are in violation of Section 4B regarding visual consistency, it read. No signature, just the HOA letterhead and a demand for corrective landscaping. I called the number listed. The woman who answered didn't even know what the system was. She thought it was a pool filter. When I explained its function, there was a pause, then laughter. That's a bit much, don't you think? We have city fire hydrants. We're not exactly in the boonies. That was the beginning. I ignored the first few notices. I thought they'd lose interest once they realized it was permitted, inspected, and approved by the county fire marshal himself. I even had a plaque mounted discreetly on the cabinet door that read, Emergency Fire Support System registered and certified. But Karen didn't care about plaques. She cared about appearances and control. It wasn't long before she came knocking, uninvited heels crunching on the gravel like tiny warning sirens. You've got wires showing, she said, arms folded. And that pump, can't you at least paint it beige? It's an eyesore. It's galvanized steel. Paint would void the fire rating, I answered, calm as I could manage. She blinked at me like I was speaking Martian. Look, I don't want to escalate this, but neighbors are complaining, especially with that noise. It hasn't run in months. Well, when it does, it sounds like a leaf blower on steroids. Just saying. I looked past her toward the row of cookie-cutter homes she claimed to represent. Most of the neighbors hadn't said a word. Some had even asked me about the system. Curious, respectful. But Karen was always the one who spoke the loudest and the last. Before she left that day, she glanced at the hydrant outlet and muttered, "What kind of man builds something like this and expects people not to notice?" I wanted to say the kind who's carried dead children out of fire-trapped buildings. The kind who's watched a hose sputter and die in his hands while screaming for backup that never came. But I stayed quiet. People like Karen don't listen to truth unless it's wrapped in ribbon and delivered by someone they already respect. That was the problem. Over the next few weeks, the citations increased. Now they claimed the slab violated setback requirements. Then it was the unregistered signage. Then the hazardous spill risk from the fuel tank, which was double-walled and EPA certified. Each claim was more desperate than the last. I responded with copies of my permit's engineer sign-offs, even emails with the city utilities liaison, confirming that the system had been mapped into the broader fire response plan for the block. They ignored it all. Then they brought in a landscaping consultant. I watched from my porch as a man in khaki slacks and a wide-brim hat took photos of the pump. Karen followed behind him, whispering, pointing. That night, I got a final notice. System must be removed or relocated within 21 days to comply with HOA Regulation 8C. That was the first time I felt the burn behind my sternum. Not anger, not yet. Just something old and bitter waking up. A warning I'd felt before back in the job, right before things went sideways. Right before people got hurt. I typed out my reply carefully. Attached scanned blueprints, attached legal memorandums from my attorney. I copied the city fire inspector, the local councilman, even the regional risk officer. I printed everything twice and sent it via certified mail. I wasn't just protecting a pump anymore. I was protecting a truth none of them wanted to face. When the fire comes, it doesn't care about beige paint, HOA codes, or perfectly trimmed hedges. It only cares about whether you're ready. Karen wasn't, but I was. It started with a photograph. Not one I took, one Karen did. She had crouched just far enough into my yard with her phone to snap a low-angle shot of the pump station, careful to catch the light hitting the side in a way that exaggerated the machinery's bulk. In the picture, it looked menacing, industrial, out of place. And that was the point. She posted it in the HOA's private Facebook group with the caption, "Well, is this the image we want representing Rosebend Meadows? This is not an industrial park." Within an hour, my inbox lit up. A couple of neighbors messaged me directly embarrassed, saying they didn't realize the HOA was targeting my fire backup system. One even apologized for liking the post, but the damage was done. Karen had stirred the hive. By that evening, she'd scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting on a Tuesday of all days. The meeting was held at the clubhouse just down the road in the same hall where we used to host potlucks and summer movie nights. But that night, the tone was far from neighborly. I walked in and felt every eye track me. Karen was at the front, standing beneath the HOA banner like she was addressing the United Nations. Next to her sat 3 of the 5 board members: Ed, who never said a word unless Karen gave him a glance; Mona, who always looked uncomfortable with conflict; and Terrence, the only one I respected, though he rarely won a vote. Karen cleared her throat into the microphone. Tonight's special agenda item concerns the structure located at 418 West Larkspur Lane, also known as the pump. The way she said the pump made it sound like I'd buried a nuclear device. This apparatus, she continued flipping to a projected image of the same photograph from Facebook, violates several clauses in our governing documents. Notably, Section 4B regarding visible utility equipment and 8C on sound emissions. I raised my hand. Excuse me. That system is certified emergency equipment. I've provided documentation to the board. Twice. Karen offered me a tight politician's smile. Yes, Mr. Delaney, and your documents have been reviewed. However, aesthetics matter in a neighborhood like ours. Our homes have a shared look, a community brand. Fire doesn't care about your brand, I muttered. That earned a few chuckles in the room. She ignored them. Furthermore, we've received complaints from several residents about the noise, the visual disruption, and possible safety concerns related to the fuel tank. You mean the EPA-certified double-insulated underground fuel tank with 6 inspection permits? Karen bristled. We're not here to debate qualifications. We're here to vote on a motion. She turned to the board. Motion to declare the system a violation and demand removal or masking in accordance with HOA regulations. Terrence spoke up then gently. Karen, with all due respect, this system provides emergency fire pressure, correct? It's not part of city infrastructure, Karen snapped. It's not in the public records. I've filed it with the city, I interrupted. Twice. It's integrated into the hydrant grid. It was signed off by the county fire chief. Karen shook her head and turned back to the board. All in favor. Ed raised his hand immediately. Mona hesitated, but followed. Terrence stared at the table. Karen nodded, satisfied. Motion passes. Mr. Delaney, you have 30 days to remove or conceal the equipment to the board's satisfaction. I stood slowly. You do realize that disabling that system could make you liable if a fire breaks out and the hydrants lose pressure. Karen's smile thinned into a line. We're not disabling anything. We're merely asking that you comply with community standards. That system is part of the community's safety, I replied. Then perhaps the city should be funding it, she said. But it's on your private property, and this HOA does not permit unapproved utilities. That was the moment I understood something deeper about Karen. It wasn't just about the box or the noise or even the rules. It was about power. She couldn't stand the idea that someone had built something important without her permission, that it worked better than anything she'd ever controlled, that people respected it even if they didn't understand it. She wanted to erase it because she hadn't authorized it. I walked out without another word. The next morning, I received a hand-delivered notice from the board taped to my front gate. Final warning violation 4B and 8C non-compliance will result in daily fines of $250. Beginning July 1st. I took the letter inside, made coffee, and sat by the window staring at the pump. I could remove it, sure. I could roll over like so many others had given to the absurdity, tuck it away behind a trellis, put a fake rock over the hydrant paint, the cabinets beige, or bury them entirely. That would appease the rules. But it wouldn't be right. That system was built from years of experience and too many close calls. I'd watched pressure collapse at the worst moments. I'd screamed into radios begging for alternate feeds. I'd carried children whose lungs had filled with smoke because the water hadn't come fast enough. That system wasn't a vanity project. It was redemption. I called my lawyer Janet Nolan, who specialized in civil infrastructure cases and municipal code battles. She listened patiently as I explained everything, then whistled low. You have a solid position, Mike, especially if the system's tied into the city's hydrant matrix. But HOA boards are tricky. They operate in a weird legal pocket, half contract, half quasi-government. What do you recommend? Document everything. Get notarized copies of your permits. Install security cameras. If they escalate, we file a cease and desist under public safety exception. What if they sabotage it? I asked, the words coming before I meant them to. Janet paused. You think they might? I don't know. But Karen, she wants this thing gone. I've seen that look before. Then get the cameras up today. I did. I spent that afternoon installing motion sensors and wireless cams around the perimeter. One pointed directly at the control panel, another toward the main fuel intake. I left nothing to chance. That night, I sat by the window again. The pump was still. The trees rustled gently in the breeze. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. The world seemed quiet, almost peaceful. But I knew better. I'd seen too many fires start when the world seemed quiet. And I had a feeling deep in my gut that the real blaze hadn't even begun yet. I spent the next 2 days in my garage dusting off a lifetime's worth of files. The HOA thought they could drown me in paper, but I was the one who taught rookies how to file incident reports under pressure, how to log pump failures during active wildfires, how to annotate hydrant flowcharts mid-response. If they wanted a paper war, they picked the wrong man. My old fireproof cabinet was still where I left it, tucked between the shelves of tools and bins of old uniforms. Inside were blueprints stamped and signed. Every component of the backup pump system was documented: the pressure settings, the valve specifications, the underground fuel tank dimensions. I even had the original letter from Chief Morales, the former county fire chief, commending the system's installation as a model for private-public emergency coordination. I photocopied everything. I made triplicate packets and labeled them meticulously. 1. HOA compliance. Dispute 2. City Fire Department records. 3. Legal defense. Each binder had color-coded tabs, and I included a cover sheet listing the statutes and code exceptions that backed me. California Civil Code, Bar 1354, allows for safety-related improvements regardless of HOA architectural standards. Local Municipal Ordinance 47.22b explicitly encourages private auxiliary water systems tied into public hydrants. Fire Code Appendix B105.2, which makes it clear that backup systems are not subject to aesthetic restrictions if built to code and pre-approved by a certified engineer. I added screenshots of the email thread with city utilities, a PDF copy of the emergency response plan I'd submitted to the local precinct, and for good measure, I included photographs of my system next to other approved equipment hidden behind shrubs, satellite dishes, generator boxes, pool pumps. Let them try to tell me mine was worse. I hand-delivered the first binder to the HOA office. Karen wasn't in the receptionist. Gina looked uncomfortable as I slid it across the counter. It's all in there, I told her calmly. I expect a written response within 10 business days. Gina nodded quickly, eyes flicking to the bold red tag on the front that read, Legal notice, public safety infrastructures. The second binder I brought to the city building where a young fire inspector named Aiden recognized me immediately. He shook my hand hard. "You're the guy with the booster pump system, right? My supervisor still talks about that install. Said you did it cleaner than most of the contractors we deal with." I nodded. "Now they want me to remove it." His eyebrows shot up. "Who does?" "Our HOA. He whistled. "Let me guess, Karen. She's the president." "Say no more." He made a note in the system, scanned my binder into their records, and promised to log a follow-up call with the city's risk manager. He even offered to testify if it came to that. I felt a glimmer of relief for the first time in weeks. That night, I sent the third binder to my lawyer, Janet, who replied within minutes. "This is gold. You're legally bulletproof. If they keep pushing, we file a writ. You've got every regulation and precedent on your side." But being right wasn't the same as being safe. The HOA had already fined me $750 by then. 3 days of non-compliance. A new letter had shown up in my mailbox. Continued violation will result in lien proceedings against your property. That was when I realized this wasn't about rules anymore. This was Karen's vendetta. So I fought the way I knew how I printed signs. I laminated 3 notices and posted them on my fence near the pump station. This fire system is city integrated and code compliant. Tampering with it is a felony under California Penal Code 591. Smile, you're on camera. The very next day, Karen marched up my driveway. I had just come back from a grocery run and was unloading bags when I saw her pink blazer marching like a warning flare through my side gate. "You can't put up signs like that," she barked before even saying hello. "They're accurate," I said, not bothering to look up. "They're aggressive. No more aggressive than finding someone for trying to keep your house from burning down." Her jaw tightened. "You're escalating this. I'm documenting it." I gestured to the small camera mounted near the fuel intake. Its red light blinked gently. She noticed. "You're recording me. I'm protecting critical infrastructure." She looked around, flustered, then stepped back. "The board will take this under review." "Good. Let me know when they've read page 12 of the fire code." She left in a huff, and I sat on the porch steps, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. I was calm on the outside, but inside I was boiling. Not just at Karen. At the entire idea that someone with no knowledge of public safety, no background in emergency service, could threaten to dismantle something designed to save lives simply because it didn't fit her idea of suburban perfection. Later that week, I received a formal letter from the HOA's legal counsel. It was stuffed with vague threats, references to covenants, and paragraphs of boilerplate language. But buried on page 3, one sentence stood out. "Failure to comply with removal of the unauthorized structure may result in the HOA seeking an emergency injunction." I showed it to Janet, who laughed. "This is saber rattling. They know they'd lose in court, but they're hoping you'll blink first." "I won't," I said. She leaned forward. "Then we need to be ready in case they blink second and do something stupid." "What do you mean? You said they've been on your property before. If someone tries to sabotage that system, they'd be in violation of both civil and criminal law. But proving intent will be key." That night, I checked all 6 of my security cameras. I adjusted the angles, made sure they were all recording in high resolution, and backed up the last week's worth of footage to a separate drive stored off-site. I didn't want to believe Karen would go that far. But I'd seen people like her before. People so obsessed with control, they'd rather break something than admit it serves a purpose they didn't approve. A week passed, then another. The fines kept adding up. The HOA sent me a new final notice, this one stamped in red ink. Karen avoided eye contact when we passed each other on the street, but I could feel it coming the moment when someone would crack. And sure enough, one quiet Wednesday at 2:42 a.m., the system went dark. I was woken by the motion alert on my phone. The pump sensor sent out an error code. Pressure dropped. The backflow valve alarm lit up. And the camera feed, grainy but clear, showed a figure in a dark hoodie crouching by the panel. Someone had cut the power cable, and they did it while staring straight into the lens. Karen might not have held the pliers, but she was holding the match. The first thing I felt was the vibration in my chest, the low, hard buzz of my phone on the nightstand. Then came the silence. Silence from the pump. It's funny how used I was to the faint mechanical hum it gave off while in standby, almost like the breathing of something asleep but ready to act. But that night it was dead. No status blink, no pressure cycle, nothing. I reached for my phone, still half in sleep. The screen glared into my eyes. Motion alert, South Lot, 2:42 a.m. Pump failure, pressure sensor offline. Adrenaline kicked in like it always used to when I was on the force. I threw off the cover's boots on an under 10 seconds flashlight and sidearm grabbed without thinking. I didn't expect trouble, not yet, but I wasn't taking chances. The night was heavy, the kind of stillness that hangs before a storm or just after something important has broken. I stepped outside and felt it in my gut. Something had happened. I moved fast, flashlight cutting across the oaks. My cameras fed real-time into the screen in my hand, and I toggled through the angles while walking. Camera 2, the one angled at the electrical conduit, was frozen for a moment, then flicked to life. There he was, a figure, hooded, leaning down right by the control panel. I stopped in my tracks. He had wire cutters in his hand, gloved. He worked fast, clearly knew the layout. No fumbling. He sliced through the exterior conduit like he'd studied it. Then he reached up and turned the camera. That's why the feed glitched. But not before I caught two critical frames: the angle of his shoulders, the shape of his build, and most telling, the reflection in the panel's metal housing. The HOA issued safety vest, navy blue with the HOA crest faintly visible in the low light. My flashlight beam found the panel next. Wires were hanging like tendons, the protective casing pried open. The diesel backup starter had been unplugged, and the battery connector had been pulled free. The bastard had known exactly what to hit. And he didn't take a single tool with him. Left it all there, either a rookie mistake or a message. I stepped back into the house, locked the door, and made 2 calls. First to the sheriff's office, then to Janet. The deputy on the line said someone would come by to take a statement by morning. Janet didn't hesitate. Don't touch anything. Don't reset the system. Let them see it exactly as it is. Understood, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. I'll draft a criminal mischief complaint, she continued, already typing, and a cease and desist to the HOA. You've got the footage. Yeah. He turned the camera, but not before I got a frame. It's someone from the board. There was a pause. Mike, she said carefully, you need to understand what this means. This isn't just fines or HOA harassment anymore. This is sabotage of emergency infrastructure. I know. This is felony territory. I spent the rest of the night reviewing footage, cataloging files, and freezing frames. I had a shot of the tool bag he used, standard issue, for the HOA maintenance crew. And I zoomed in on the hoodie. There was a name tag sewn onto the edge, just barely legible. Ed, board member, HOA treasurer, Karen's lapdog. At 7:15 a.m., sharp, the sheriff's car rolled into my driveway. Deputy Sandra Rojas stepped out. She was professional, no nonsense. Took one look at the damaged panel and whistled low. Someone knew what they were doing, she muttered. This wasn't kids messing around. I'd bet my pension it was Ed Gentry. Board guy. Karen's number 2. She raised an eyebrow. You got proof? I've got enough to warrant asking hard questions. She walked the perimeter, took photos, bagged the wire cutters and gloves. I handed her a USB stick with the video clips time-stamped and labeled. She promised to file a report that morning and loop in the city's fire marshal. By 10, the HOA had heard. I knew because Karen was at my gate, pounding on it with the fury of someone who just realized the chessboard had flipped. You called the cops, she barked. You think this is how neighbors resolve things? I walked to the gate, slow, steady. Did Ed sabotage my system? I asked plainly. Her eyes flickered. Not enough to confirm guilt, but just enough to betray panic. I'm not here to talk about Ed. I'm here because this escalation is completely inappropriate. He committed a crime, Karen. He cut through certified safety infrastructure. We have protocols, she hissed. If you had just complied with the board's aesthetic requests, none of this would have happened. There it was, the truth spoken plain. She didn't deny it. She justified it. I hope your lawyer is ready, I said, because this is going to court, civil and criminal. Her voice shook. You're making a scene out of a misunderstanding. I stepped closer. No, Karen. You're making a scene because you thought no one would call you out when you pushed too far. For a moment, her composure cracked. Not fear, rage, the kind that comes from losing control. She turned without another word and stormed off. 2 hours later, I received a group email from the HOA board stating that due to an active investigation, Ed Gentry was being placed on temporary leave. Karen's name was nowhere in the message, but I knew she was scrambling behind the scenes trying to shield herself. But it was too late. The damage wasn't just physical anymore. That night, as I rewired the pump and tested the system, I stood in the glow of the control panel and watched the gauges flicker back to life. Green across the board. Pressure steady. Backup battery fully recharged. The system had been wounded, but it was alive again. And now I had something more powerful than pumps or permits. I had proof. The sheriff's report went in. The footage was logged. The wires were bagged, tagged, and sent to the lab. But none of it seemed to matter. A week passed, then another. No charges, no official statement. The HOA went silent, except for the daily fines which kept coming like clockwork, $250 per day, stacking higher than my fence. My inbox filled with neighbors forwarding bored emails that danced around the sabotage like it had never happened. The system was compromised under unclear circumstances. That's what they called it. Unclear. I sat in City Hall for 2 hours, waiting to speak with the deputy fire marshal, who finally poked his head into the waiting room with an apologetic smile. Mike Wright, look, we're tied up with a wildfire response up north. Your system isn't officially city infrastructure, so it's not our top priority. But it's mapped into your grid, I said. I showed your guys the documentation. It supplements pressure for this entire block, and the factory behind it. He winced. Sure, but that's a private tie-in, not a municipal install. So if someone destroys it, that's not your concern. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's complicated. No, it wasn't. It was sabotage, and no one wanted to say it out loud. Even Janet was beginning to lose her edge. We've sent the cease and desist. We filed the preliminary civil suit. The sheriff's office says the investigation is ongoing, but without more direct evidence tying Ed or anyone else on the board to the incident, the DA won't move. I've got him on video. In a hoodie, with gloves. No face, no direct confession. It's circumstantial. Circumstantial, I snapped. He's wearing a vest with the HOA emblem. It says ED. He knew exactly where to cut, bypassed the dummy wires, and went straight for the surge leads. I know, you know, but prosecutors need it to be bulletproof. I sank back in the chair, exhausted. It felt like being back at the department during internal reviews, when politics mattered more than truth, when lives were lost but nobody wanted their name on the paperwork. That night, I walked the perimeter of the pump again. The system was restored, but something inside me stayed broken. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I was isolated. The kind of loneliness that seeps in when you realize the people meant to have your back would rather look away than stand up. Neighbors avoided eye contact now. The ones who used to wave when I walked to the mailbox just nodded stiffly or turned their heads. The Facebook group had gone quiet. No more HOA posts, no more Karen crusades. Just silence, as if the whole street was holding its breath. Then one evening, as I was loading up supplies for my truck, I heard a voice from across the street. Hey, Mike. It was Terrence, the only board member who hadn't voted against me that night. He stood awkwardly at the edge of my driveway, holding a beer. Mind if I... He gestured toward the steps. I nodded, and we sat in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas buzz through the dusk. You know, he said after a long pause, I voted against the motion to remove your system. I remember, but I didn't fight hard enough. I said nothing. He took a sip of his beer, then looked over at the pump station, now bathed in warm light from the new motion-activated LEDs I'd installed. I didn't think it would get this far, he said. I thought Karen just wanted a win. I didn't think anyone would actually touch the system. Someone did. I know. He set the beer down between his feet. People are scared to speak up. They saw what happened to you. They're worried they'll be next. The HOA's never been this aggressive before, but Karen's got a way of making people feel like silence is safer. She's not wrong, I muttered. He looked at me. You think you're alone, but you're not. Some of us are with you. We're just waiting for the right moment. What moment? He shrugged. Something big enough that people can't pretend anymore. I didn't know whether to laugh or curse, but I appreciated his honesty. After he left, I sat out there alone for a while longer, watching the red light on the camera blink, listening to the whir of the generator kick in for a test cycle. And then it hit me, and they didn't need to believe me yet. Because when the time came, when the system mattered most, they'd remember who fought to keep it alive. The system didn't exist to win arguments. It existed to stand between this neighborhood and disaster. I went back inside and opened my emergency planning folder. I reprinted evacuation maps, updated phone trees, refreshed the laminated sheet that listed fire extinguisher locations for each nearby property. Then I emailed every household on my block with the subject line: "If fire comes, read this before you run." Some unsubscribed. Some replied with thanks, but a precious few, asked real questions about the pump, about the hydrant tie-ins, about what to do if power failed or if the main line cracked. They weren't many, but they were enough. That weekend, I walked out to the pump station and installed a new sign beneath the pressure gauge. This system is code compliant and ready. If you're reading this during a fire, stay low, stay calm, and pray it holds. I stepped back and looked at the words. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a promise. A promise that even if no one believed me now, they would, when the flames came. It was a Tuesday, hot, dry, and loaded with the kind of tension only old firefighters can smell in the wind. The kind that dries your lips and tells you deep down in your ribs that something's about to break. The factory had been quiet that week. Karen's husband Richard ran a light plastics manufacturing business about 200 yards beyond my property line. The building was old steel frame, flat roof, no sprinkler retrofit. I'd toured it years ago, back when he invited me over to show off his operation. I noticed the flammable solvent drums tucked too close to the wall, the overloaded circuits, the fan vent clogged with years of dust. I made a few polite comments at the time, but he waved them off. "Insurance is covered," he said. I wonder if he remembered those words as he watched the flames take it all. It was just after 4:00 p.m. when I heard it, the first siren, then another, then another. 3 tones, different pitches. A structure response, big. I was on my porch, just finishing up a call with Janet about the HOA's latest delay tactics. I stood, phone still in hand, and turned toward the west. The smoke was already rising, thick, black, not a brush fire, not electrical, plastics. I dropped the phone. I knew exactly where that smoke was coming from. The factory. My boots were on before my mind caught up. I ran to the pump house, not to check it, but to watch the pressure gauge. I knew the system inside and out, its rhythms, its temperament, its flaws. I'd trained it like a dog, and in that moment, it was ready. But the pressure, it wasn't rising. The needle sat flat, no cycling, no reserve flow. That wasn't right. I yanked open the cabinet. The generator blinked green. The battery read full. The intake lines were clear. The remote activation signal had not been received, which meant only one thing. City water was down. Somewhere upstream from the fire, the grid had buckled. Whether it was a cracked main, a backflow block, or simply overload from hydrants, already drawing too much pressure, I didn't know. But my system was waiting for the city signal to fail before engaging. Only now it wasn't detecting failure, because someone had altered the relay settings. I pulled the failsafe override. The pump roared to life, diesel coughing once, then stabilizing in a steady rumble. Pressure surged. The gauge leapt past baseline. I watched as the auxiliary line to the hydrant junction began to fill. It was working. Then the text came through. From Terrence. "They're calling for backup hydrants. City flow is weak. Fire climbing. It's bad." I ran to the road. From the hill crest by my drive, I could see everything. Smoke poured from the warehouse, flames leaping from the roof in wild tongues. Sirens converged from both directions. Fire crews were deploying across the perimeter, but some of the hoses hung limp. Flaccid. No pressure. I knew that look. I'd lived that nightmare. The water wasn't coming fast enough, and the wind was shifting. Embers caught the breeze and drifted across the service road toward the western fence line, toward the neighborhood. That's when I saw her. Karen. She was at the far end of the cul-de-sac, running. Hair loose, face twisted, screaming. Richard's inside. She sprinted across the lawn, stumbling heels, forgotten barefoot on the hot concrete. One of the firemen tried to grab her, but she shoved him off. I watched in frozen disbelief as she ran toward the edge of the police line, shrieking. And then I saw something else. The backup hose connected to the hydrant closest to my property began to stiffen. Water. The pump was holding. The crews at the north side of the building began getting pressure finally. They charged in with foam axes flashing. Another team attacked the flank from the eastern wall, one by one, trucks repositioned. My system had bought them time. But inside the chaos, Karen dropped to her knees and let out a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't just grief. It was terror mixed with guilt, because she realized somewhere deep in the panic that the very system she tried to destroy was now trying to save her husband. I moved closer, staying outside the perimeter. The incident commander barked orders. The wind shifted again and smoke poured across the road. I pulled a bandana from my pocket and tied it over my mouth, instincts kicking in. 20 minutes passed, maybe 30. Then finally the call came over the radio. All clear, building evacuated, patient recovered. They found Richard in the north wing, disoriented, coughing, but alive. 2 medics loaded him into the ambulance, and Karen rode with him clutching his hand, face ghost white and streaked with ash. I stayed behind watching. The fire was contained, but the building was gutted. Melted siding, scorched beams, collapsed roof. One entire wall had buckled inward. And at the far end of the property, just before the embankment dipped down toward the water catchment, sat the booster line for my pump. Still vibrating. Still pushing. Still doing what it was built to do. No one thanked me. No one had to. Because the sirens had spoken louder than any HOA citation ever could. And Karen's screams, they said the rest. When I walked home that evening, the sun was low. Ash floated in the air like snow. I passed neighbors standing on their lawns, silent, watching me. For the first time in months, they didn't look away. One of them, a woman named Gloria, from 2 houses down, stepped forward. "I saw it working," she said, voice hoarse. "Your pump, you saved people." I nodded once. That's what it's for. She reached out and touched my arm. "I'm sorry. We should have listened." Others murmured similar things, quiet, honest. It didn't bring justice, not yet. But it brought something close. Acknowledgement. And in a place where silence had ruled for too long, that was a beginning. They say fire purifies, but I've never believed that. Fire reveals. It strips everything down: structure, reputation, illusion, and shows you what's underneath. On the day of the fire, Karen was exposed not by the flames, but by what she did when they came. It wasn't long after they pulled Richard from the building that the whispers began. At first, it was sympathy. She was the woman who almost lost her husband. But when the fire crew captain asked why the hydrant lines had gone limp, why backup pressure had been needed from a private auxiliary system, someone said my name. And someone else said the word sabotage. By nightfall, she wasn't just the grieving wife. She was the president of the HOA, who had declared war on the very system that saved the neighborhood. And she knew it. The first time I saw her after the fire, it was the morning after. I was out by the pump house doing my usual inspection, adjusting the pressure calibration back to standby mode. The whole system had run hot for 2.5 hours. It had performed better than I could have hoped even after the sabotage and repairs. I heard the footsteps before I saw her. Karen didn't say anything at first. She just stood at the edge of my driveway, her arms hanging stiff by her sides. Her face was a mask of exhaustion, makeup, streaked eyes, sunken hair frizzy, and still smelling of smoke. No clipboard. No fake smile. Just a woman gutted by something bigger than herself. "You saved him," she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even gratitude, just a fact. A sentence trying to figure out how to exist in the world. I didn't look up from the panel. The system did what it was built to do. "No," she whispered. "You did. You built it. You fought for it. You kept it alive even after—" She stopped. The words caught in her throat. I turned to her. "Even after you tried to bury it." She flinched. I watched her struggle with herself. The pride, the shame, the need to justify. But there was nothing left for her to argue. "I didn't know," she said, "about the tie-in. The factory. Any of it. I thought you were just being difficult. Stubborn." I tried to explain. I didn't listen. I crossed my arms. "You did more than not listen. You fined me. You tried to take legal action. Someone cut the lines." Her eyes darted away. "I didn't order that," she said quickly. "It wasn't me. But you let it happen." Her silence was confirmation. I sighed. "Karen, I don't care if you painted your house pink or voted to ban barbecue grills. But when you went after safety, when you made it about control instead of responsibility, you crossed a line. And people almost died because of it." Tears welled in her eyes. For a moment, I thought she'd collapse right there. "I didn't know how to stop it," she said. "Once it started, I had to double down. The board expected it. People expected it. I thought if I admitted I was wrong, you thought it would make you weak." She nodded. "You were wrong." Her shoulders sank. We stood there for a while, the pump humming softly behind me, the quiet weight of ash still clinging to the air. Finally, she looked up. "I'm stepping down," she said. "Effective immediately. Terrence is taking over. He's already called a special meeting." "What about Ed?" "He's already gone. Resigned last night. His wife threatened to leave him if he didn't." That part didn't surprise me. What happens to the fines? They're being voided, all of them. The board voted to remove the violations from your record. You'll get a letter this week. I nodded slowly. And the system, I asked. She swallowed. We'd like to make it official. Incorporate it into the community safety plan. Maybe add signage, a locked perimeter, whatever you think it needs. I stared at her, trying to gauge if this was just another performance. But the woman in front of me wasn't Karen, the HOA president. She was Karen, the widow. That almost was. The woman who had screamed so loudly in the smoke, her voice cracked into something raw and unforgettable. The woman who had been humbled by fire. Fine, I said. But the first sign doesn't go through your design committee. She gave a weak laugh. Deal. She turned to leave, then stopped halfway down the walk. I heard what people are calling it now, she said. What? She looked over her shoulder. The Delaney pump. I raised an eyebrow. Catchy, I muttered. She smiled faintly. You earned it. And then she was gone. Later that day, Terrence stopped by with an envelope. Inside was an official apology letter signed by every board member except Ed, and a new draft of the community safety resolution. It acknowledged the pump system as essential infrastructure. It included plans to add a backup generator funded by the HOA reserve. But what meant more than any signature or resolution was the stack of handwritten notes that followed. Gloria from down the street, the Castillos, the Nguyen family. Even Mr. Larkins, the cranky old Vietnam vet who once yelled at kids for stepping on his grass. Each one wrote to thank me, not just for the system, but for standing firm when it would have been easier to fold. That night, I added a second plaque to the pump house door. Delaney Pump Station, Esting 2019, saved lives, August 14th, 2025. Retired, but never standing down. I stood there long after the sun dipped below the hills, watching the soft red light blink from the motion sensor, and thought about Karen's scream again. How it had cut through the noise of fire sirens and chaos. Not because it was louder, but because it was real. For the first time, Karen had been forced to feel what it meant to be powerless. And that's what changed her. That's what fire does. It doesn't destroy you. It shows you who you are when everything else is stripped away. The first official inquiry began 2 days after the fire. It started with a call from the county fire marshal's office, this time from a man I'd never met, a senior investigator named Alonzo Cruz. He was direct, polite, and came with a clipboard, 2 officers, and the kind of tone that made people uncomfortable, even when they hadn't done anything wrong. Mr. Delaney, he said, shaking my hand on the front porch, we're conducting a formal assessment of auxiliary fire support failures and system irregularities reported during the Rose Bend blaze. Your name came up often. He wasn't smiling. Not out of hostility, he was just tired. The kind of tired that only comes from sorting through layers of bureaucratic incompetence and preventable disasters. I led them to the pump house. Cruz studied everything with the kind of precision I appreciated. He didn't flinch at the patchwork repairs or the ash still baked into the crevices. He took notes. Asked questions I hadn't heard in years. Not superficial HOA nonsense, but real operational level stuff. What was your system's trigger pressure before the override? 68 psi. And after the sabotage, what did you detect? Dead zero, pressure sensor was bypassed. I had to pull manual override to engage. He made a mark on his sheet. Who would have known how to do that? Someone with access to the electrical schematics. Or someone who studied them. Who had access? I hesitated. The HOA board demanded a copy of the layout 6 months ago, claiming they needed it for compliance review. Did you give it to them? Under threat of daily fines and lien action. Yes. He nodded. That was the beginning. Over the next week, the fire marshal's office came back twice. The second time, they brought a specialist in system sabotage. Yes, that's a real title. And he spent 3 hours photographing the cut lines, connector scarring, and circuit board tampering. Meanwhile, the sheriff's department reopened their investigation into Ed Gentry. According to Deputy Sandra Rojas, the evidence I'd submitted, combined with new testimony from a former maintenance contractor who'd quit the HOA 2 months prior, was now considered actionable. Turns out Ed had been bragging over beers at a local dive bar about how he'd solved the Delaney problem, calling it a silent fix. The bartender, a guy named Louie, overheard. He'd been a volunteer firefighter in his younger days, and he hated arrogance. Louis submitted a sworn affidavit. With that, the sheriff's office issued a search warrant. They found the hoodie, gloves, and wire cutters in a box in Ed's garage. right next to a half-shredded HOA compliance folder with my name circled in red ink. Ed was arrested on a Friday afternoon. The headlines hit the next morning. HOA board member charged in fire system sabotage, backup pump credited with saving lives. The neighborhood exploded. Not with celebration, no, not yet, but with murmurs, text chains, front lawn conversations that no longer felt nervous. For the first time, people were talking openly. Karen, to her credit, issued a formal statement acknowledging her failure in leadership. It was terse, but it hit the right notes. She claimed she was shocked by Ed's actions, saddened by the rift caused in the community, and committed to stepping aside so that a more balanced and safety-focused board could move forward. Terrence became interim president. The board shrank from 5 to 3. And then came the insurance investigators. They arrived with hard shoes and harder questions. The warehouse Richard managed had been covered under a high-risk fire policy, one that contained clauses about sprinkler maintenance, response delays, and yes, available hydrant pressure at time of incident. The backup system, my system, was the only thing that saved them from a total liability apocalypse. And they knew it. I was interviewed for hours. They asked for diagrams, flowcharts, backup logs. I handed them everything. Not out of duty, but because I wanted the truth to lock in place so tightly no one could pry it loose. One of the adjusters, a woman named Elaine, looked over my pressure logs and shook her head in disbelief. The system you built, it ran for almost 2.5 hours straight. Yes. And you funded and maintained this entirely on your own. Every dollar, every screw. She glanced up from her notes. Do you know how rare that is? I didn't answer. A week later, I received a letter. Certified. Official seal of the insurance company embossed on the envelope. Inside was a check, not enormous, but enough to cover every fine the HOA ever issued, plus the full cost of restoring the pump system to its original specs with updated fire-rated components. But more important was the second document. Declaration of Essential Infrastructure. In recognition of the privately maintained, publicly beneficial fire auxiliary system located at 418 West Larkspur Lane, this letter affirms the system's role in fire suppression efforts on August 14, 2025, and its integration into regional fire response planning. It was signed by the fire marshal, the city council safety chair, and the president of the county insurance commission. They'd copied the HOA board on it. The next day, Terrence called and asked to meet. We sat at the same folding table where Karen had once held her tribunal. This resolution, he said, tapping the document, it changes everything. The HOA can't interfere with the pump anymore. Not even for aesthetics. I know. We're drafting a new amendment. It'll go to a vote. It'll protect your system permanently and make it a model for the region. I was quiet for a moment, then I nodded. Good. He hesitated. There's one more thing. He handed me a packet. Inside was a draft of the HOA newsletter, the cover story. The fire that changed us. In the center, a full-color photo of the pump with the words, "The Delaney System, how one man's fight saved a community." I didn't expect the tears. They came anyway. I stood up, shook Terrence's hand, and walked home with the packet pressed to my chest like a lifeline. The sun was dipping low again, shadows stretching long across the lawn. The oaks rustled in the wind. And somewhere behind me, the newly installed steel sign next to the pump caught the light just right. It shimmered like a medal. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was fighting anymore. I felt seen. The day Ed was formally arraigned, the courthouse was full, though most people tried not to look like they were watching. Karen wasn't there, at least not publicly. But her shadow was. Everyone knew this wasn't just about Ed. He may have been the hands that cut the wires, but she was the voice that lit the fuse. When the charges were read, felony vandalism of emergency infrastructure, reckless endangerment, and interference with public safety systems. Ed didn't say a word, just nodded eyes down the weight of what he'd done, finally catching up to him. His lawyer tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, that Ed was only trying to inspect the system for noncompliance and accidentally severed a line. But the video footage, the tool evidence, the maintenance records, all of it painted a different story. The judge didn't even bother with bail. I wasn't angry watching him sit there, not anymore. There was something small and shrunken about him now. The kind of look you only see in men who thought they were untouchable until a single match proved them wrong. But the courtroom was only one part of the reckoning. The HOA board called an emergency assembly the following weekend, this time open to all homeowners. The meeting was held in the school gym instead of the clubhouse because they expected a crowd, and they got one. Over 100 residents packed into the bleachers and folding chairs. I arrived just as Terrence was adjusting the mic. He spotted me, gave me a small nod, then turned to the crowd. "We're here to do what the board should have done a long time ago," he said. "Acknowledge our mistakes, take accountability, and make structural changes to ensure they never happen again." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the room. He continued, "The HOA's mission is to protect the community, not harm it. But we allowed policy and power to blind us to a basic truth. Safety is not optional, and no rulebook, no aesthetic regulation should ever override the lives of our neighbors." He then held up the new proposal. Amendment 9F, Emergency Infrastructure Protection Clause, which guaranteed immunity for any code-compliant safety system built on private property, regardless of its appearance, if it served a demonstrable public safety purpose. The vote was taken on paper ballots. I didn't even need to cast mine. The results were announced 20 minutes later, 96-4 in favor. The amendment passed. People applauded. Some even stood. I stood too, not for applause, but because I wanted to look around to really see them. These people, this neighborhood. The same folks who once avoided me, who watched silently while Karen tried to erase what I'd built. They weren't cowards. They were just waiting for permission to believe again. After the meeting, dozens came up to shake my hand. Some hugged me. Gloria brought cookies. The Castillos invited me to dinner. And Mr. Larkins, who once barked at me for not mowing my lawn on time, handed me a cigar from a vintage box and said, "You've got bigger balls than the entire board combined." I didn't smoke it, but I kept it. The consequences for the HOA went beyond policy. Their insurance premiums skyrocketed. 2 of their preferred vendors pulled out of contracts. A civil lawsuit was filed by one of the firefighters who suffered a minor injury due to low water pressure. His lawyer cited HOA interference as a contributing factor. Karen, now fully retired from the board, sold her house within the month. She didn't throw a farewell party. There was no listing on Zillow. Just a moving truck at dawn and a silence where her voice used to echo. Richard, her husband, recovered slowly. I saw him once at a hardware store, limping slightly, face drawn. He looked at me across the aisle. I thought he might pretend not to see me, but instead he walked up, looked me in the eye, and said 2 words. "Thank you." That was all. That was enough. Meanwhile, the city fire department asked if I'd be willing to consult on auxiliary infrastructure planning for other neighborhoods. I declined the job, but offered to train a few of their engineers on how to design what I had built. "You're a bit of a legend now," the city rep said with a smile. "I'm not a legend," I replied. "I'm a man who got tired of watching people die because the water didn't come." The Delaney pump, as people now called it, became more than a backup system. It became a symbol of vigilance, of preparedness, of one man's refusal to bend when bending would have been easier. They asked if I wanted to rename the street. I said no. Instead, I suggested a small bronze plaque be placed near the hydrant that fed from my line. The city agreed. It reads, August 14, 2025. When the system failed, this one held. Never again forget that preparation is purpose. Sometimes, I still walk out there in the early mornings, coffee in hand, watching the mist rise from the grass and the quiet hum of the standby pump whispering beneath the earth. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It just waits, ready, patient. Kind of like justice, because justice doesn't always come with a gavel or a grand speech. Sometimes it comes with pressure lines. Sometimes it comes with fire. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it comes with a second chance to remind people who they really are. There's a quiet that comes after fire. Not the silence of fear or loss, but the kind that settles when the worst has happened and you're still standing. I'd spent months fighting a war I never wanted against people I once waved to at cookouts and holiday lights contests. And now, after all the board meetings, citations, sabotage, and sirens, the dust had settled. The ashes had cooled, and I was still here. But the pump house needed more than new wiring. It needed rebirth. The old concrete slab was stained with soot and chemical residue from the backup pump's overload cycle. The steel doors were dented from months of petty vandalism. The panel lights were functional but dim. Functional wasn't enough anymore, so I rebuilt. With the help of a few neighbors, yes, neighbors, we laid a fresh concrete base reinforced with rebar and fiber mesh. We installed upgraded weatherproof cabinets, new LED indicators, an independent battery bank, and a double-insulated diesel tank with biometric locks. The city even sent a retired firefighter named Walt to help integrate the system directly into the regional alert network. Now, when hydrant pressure dips below safe levels, the Delaney pump gets the signal in real time and kicks in without human intervention. It became more than a personal project. It became infrastructure, and at the heart of it all, welded to a brushed steel plate, mounted just above the main control panel, was the new sign. Bold, simple, unflinching. This system saves lives. It exists because someone tried to destroy it. Think carefully before you touch what you don't understand. Below that, in smaller letters, Delaney Pump Station, ESTA 2019 rebuilt, 2025. We held a small dedication ceremony. No ribbon cutting, no champagne. Just handshakes, nods, and a few quiet thank yous. Gloria baked her famous pecan pie. Mr. Larkins brought his granddaughter. Terrence gave a short speech that actually made people tear up. When he handed me the city's certificate of recognition, I looked out over the faces. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They were witnesses. They were people who'd seen a system fail, seen one man stand up, and then decided maybe they could too. Karen never showed up. But that wasn't surprising. Some people rebuild in private, some don't rebuild at all. As for me, I finally slept through the night again. The pump's soft hum no longer kept me awake with worry. It became background music to my mornings. Proof that preparedness doesn't have to shout, it just has to work. There were still HOA meetings, of course. Some things never change. But now they started with a new tradition, a safety report where someone from the board updated the community on system status inspections and drills. And they always ended the same way, with someone looking toward my property and saying, "We're covered. Delaney's got us." I don't say much at those meetings, but every once in a while, someone brings up the fire again. They ask what I thought when the flames started, when the siren screamed, when the water wouldn't come. I never tell them about the fear, about the way my hands shook when I pulled that manual override, about how I prayed not in words, but in steel and pressure gauges that the thing I built would hold. Instead, I tell them this: I didn't build it because I thought the fire would come. I built it because I knew it could. And that's the thing most people forget. Justice doesn't arrive in the moment you're proven right. It comes when the people who doubted you start defending what you built. It comes when the system you fought for no longer needs you to explain it. It just stands, solid, ready, permanent. Like the pump. Like the warning sign. Like the truth that burned through everything else and remained. I'm not a hero. I'm not a vigilante. I'm not a martyr. I'm a man who refused to let bad leadership turn protection into politics. And if that means I had to drag the whole neighborhood through fire to show them what safety looks like, then so be it. Because now when storms roll in and smoke curls over the horizon, people don't call the HOA. They call me. And this time I don't answer with paperwork. I answer with water.